Thank you so much for being here with us.
You're welcome. My pleasure. You guys got the memo about?
Oh, yeah.
I look like Dean Martin. Like it's sugar-free something. It's an energy drink. It's not.
Why are you
not
ruining
booze.
the moment? Come on, just swirl
Let
it
him
around.
think it was booze, right? Yeah.
So I hate the term "ripped from the headlines." I mean, it's pretty cliched, but this book is ripped from the headlines. It's about ISIS.
Yep.
It's about black ops. So talk to me about it.
So I write thrillers. So if you're someone who has enjoyed Clancy or Ludlum, that style, that's what I write. And this book, Foreign Agent, is today's its first day out in the marketplace. And the book starts off, nobody does special operations the way the United States does. We have the best military in the world. They're absolutely incredible. And the book starts out with a special operations team about to go grab a high-level ISIS operative. In fact, it's they're a person in charge of social media. ISIS puts out about 100,000 tweets or more a day, and it's been a big problem for the rest of the world because they use this for recruiting and they get you interested and then they move you into kind of encrypted, password-protected areas so that the FBI, CIA, and other intelligence agencies can't track the conversations. So we've got a black ops team ready to go grab this guy. They're in a safe house on the Syrian border, but before they can launch, they get attacked. They get ambushed. Nobody was supposed to know they were there. In fact, they've got these two really, really cool helicopters. The CIA invented a fascinating, what I thought was fascinating way to get helicopters into areas without anybody knowing they were there. So this team gets ambushed, and all signs point to my main character as having been the leak, potentially, because he developed the intel for the raid, and so the clock is ticking, and the hunt is on for who is responsible, but everybody's blaming this guy. So he essentially has to clear himself in the course of the book. Starts off like a rocket and doesn't let off until the last page.
When did you decide that ISIS was fertile territory for a thriller?
I don't think anybody can look at what ISIS has done over the last year and not think that. But what was tough for me as an author was when I started writing this book, we had just seen the video of James Foley being beheaded by Jihadi John, was what they'd nicknamed him. And then we saw the Jordanian pilot that had been shot down, burned alive in a cage. So that was where I started, but by the time I finished up this book, we had had attacks in San Bernardino, Paris, Brussels, and here I am publishing the book today, and we had Orlando Saturday night, and then last night there was an attack outside Paris where a police commander and his wife were killed, and the ISIS-related terrorist, he had pledged his fealty to ISIS, actually live streamed the murder of these two people, and their 3-year-old was there when it happened, and he was asking his followers what should happen to the 3-year-old. It was horrible. And as a writer, I wouldn't even think to write something that bad because I wouldn't think it would ever happen, and yet truth seems to be stranger than fiction.
Good God, did you ever think we'd be here?
I mean,
you've worked with government terrorism for years and years and years.
Well, the problem that I think we have is I'm all for locating terrorists and eliminating terrorists, but the problem is terrorists keep making more of them. They're not making less. So we have an issue in this country where I think we have fallen down on the job when we're not going against the ideology. You know, terrorists believe they are justified in doing what they're doing because of a particular ideology, and we're doing nothing to combat that. And as you and I had talked about before we came on, I think probably one of the most irresponsible things we're doing is not actively, and I mean strongly, being active in supporting moderates who are trying to bring about a reformation. That should be something the U.S. is pumping tons of time and effort into.
Now back to your book. How much research, I mean, a book like this is so detailed and so specific. How much research, how many piles of papers do you have? Or I guess like that's so old school. How many computer documents do you have when you're researching a book like this?
I've got tons. So my job is if you're going to the beach this weekend or you're going to be sitting in your backyard and you want a great white-knuckle thrill ride, you want a fun read, that's my job. I'm an entertainer. But I believe that the bedrock of a great thriller are the details. And one of the things that I'm proudest of is how many men and women at the CIA, the SEAL teams, Delta Force contact me and say, oh, you get all the details right. in your books. You are talking about the equipment we carry, the scenarios we face. So I like to get these as real as possible, and I do that. I try to travel to as many places as I can in the books, and if I can't go to one because it's too I mean, I went to Afghanistan several years ago. If I can't make it to a place, I like to talk to somebody who's operated there, whether it's an intel person or a special operations person, because they will notice things that the rest of us won't notice because their lives are on the line when they're in these places. And some of the color in my book last summer, Code of Conduct, I talked to a guy who had operated in Congo a ton, and I said, well, give me something that really struck you. And I was amazed. He told me about the bicycles that everybody rides. He says, everybody's got the same black bicycle, and it's called a Mamba. And I said, well, why is it called a Mamba? He said, because the way the tires are, they leave a track in the dust that looks like a black mamba snake has just gone through. And so it's those little things. And then I hear from people that have been to Congo, and they say, oh, I remember those bicycles. Your book were you there? Did you go to Congo? You must have gone. That kind of a thing.
And I know for the Apostle, you were with the Black Ops.
Yeah, that was when I went to Afghanistan. Yep.
So talk to me about that. That must have been life-changing. Probably doesn't do it justice.
It was an amazing trip to go to Afghanistan, and what blew me away the most was how wonderful the people were. I got there and found out that two of the most respected professions in Afghanistan are doctor and author. So that was really neat for me. Best fried chicken I have ever had in my life was in Jalalabad. There was a family that had invited us to have dinner in their home, and I'm sure, it was a month's worth of wages that it cost to put on this dinner for us, but I had the best fried chicken ever. It was an amazing place. The people were, try to find somebody who will stop and help you with a flat tire on your way to the airport. In Afghanistan, when I was with this team, there's a code of honor with the Pashtun in Afghanistan. They call it the Pashtun Wali. So any village we would go into, we would make sure that we had permission from the village elders to be there. Essentially, we had to express interest, and they had to invite us. Once we were there, they would fight. Even if it was 30 seconds that we were there, and we'd only just said hello, they would fight to the death every last man in that village to protect us because we were their guests. If any of you saw the fantastic movie Lone Survivor about Marcus Luttrell, that's the situation that Marcus, actually, it inured to Marcus's benefit that they had this code of honor. So I was really, really touched and really loved the people that I met in Afghanistan.
Now, back to Foreign Agent. What was your research process for this?
Well, this is very interesting. I've got there's a lot going on in Foreign Agent. I was very interested in how ISIS was basically, you think the U.S. is so tech savvy, and yet we're back to talking about how they recruit and how ISIS, you look at their videos. Al-Qaeda looks like a third grade kind of AV class compared to the videos that, it's so slick. It looks like they, recruited a ton of people out of Hollywood to do the ISIS videos. So I was fascinated by how they had put such a glamorous spin on this. But the big thing that fascinated me was I talked to people who had been active in the intel world in that part of the Middle East, and how quickly ISIS was able to stand up after we pulled out of Iraq. And I talked to a lot of people that said, if we'd left some people behind, if we had actually negotiated what's called the Status of Forces Agreement with the Iraqis instead of completely pulling out, we might have been able to keep a lid on these guys. But probably the most interesting thing I learned was ISIS scares Al-Qaeda. That's how bad these guys are. I didn't think anything could scare Al-Qaeda, but ISIS does. And that tells you how just off-the-chain crazy, and anybody who's even watched one of those horrific videos, and if you haven't, there's nothing to see there. It's not worth watching. But it is a level of savagery that I don't think we've ever seen in since Hitler and World War II.
And when you were putting this book together, how did you know what to include?
This is a great question. Elmore Leonard, the famous writer, if anybody ever saw the movie Get Shorty, Elmore Leonard, great writer, and the one piece of advice he gives young writers is leave out all the parts that people skip. Which is, I don't know how you're supposed to know what parts people are going to flip past. I try to write very short cinematic chapters. I want you to say, I sat down just to read 2, and before I knew it, it was 2 in the morning and my eyes were bleeding. The nicest thing that gets said to me in an interview is, and our next guest is the reason I couldn't get any sleep last night. Please welcome Brad Thor to the stage. So that's the goal, is to keep it lean, keep it exciting. And James Patterson had a great piece of advice, which is to write every chapter as if it's the first chapter. And that reminded me of author Mickey Spillane, who said the first chapter sells the book, last chapter sells the next book. But if every chapter's like a first chapter, then you've got that hook, and people want to keep reading and reading more and more and more.
And in terms of ISIS, it is such, I mean, the subject is so interesting, and you could explore it probably for 1,000 books. So in terms of that subject matter specifically, how did you decide what to include versus what to keep out?
Well, the big thing is to keep the book fun, keep the book exciting, keep people turning pages. Again, this is a thriller. So the goal for me was to focus on one particular character, one guy who is the foreign agent, because ISIS thinks he's working for them. They think this is our guy. Turns out, as you read the book, you realize he works for somebody else, but he's willing to do anything ISIS tells him to do to convince them. And this guy is creating some of the most terrible things, particularly the idea is that he's trying to goad the United States into fully committing and going into Syria the way potentially we did in Afghanistan or Iraq. So ISIS thinks this guy's brilliant and he's fearless, and they have no idea that there's somebody pulling the strings behind him or above him that wants to suck the U.S. into another thing overseas.
Now, I gotta ask you, I told you backstage how much I love thrillers. Why are there so many bad ones out there?
And why are there so many?
No, truly, I mean, you go to, I'm not gonna name any book-selling sites, but you go to booksellingsite.com, and literally, it is almost impossible to find one that is truly well-written, with character development, that is topical, and that gets your eyes bleeding.
It's interesting. I got to meet a great thriller author named Harlan Coben. Great guy.
Harlan Coben, yeah.
Fantastic thriller author. And we were at a book signing party. We'd been invited to this party, and I kind of stood off to the side with Harlan, and we were having a drink, and we were talking. And I said, you know, this is nice standing here with you. I was living in Chicago at the time. Every cocktail party I go to in Chicago, people were doctors, lawyers, finance people, and they all wanted to talk about what I did for a living. Invariably, I would have been at my desk all day before this cocktail party. It was the last thing I wanted to talk about. And Harlan told me a great joke. He said, "You ever hear about this guy? He goes in to see an eye surgeon because he's going to need eye surgery, and the surgeon's looking at him and looks at his file and says, it's an author who's getting eye surgery. And the eye surgeon says to the author, says, 'Wow, I see you're an author. That's fascinating, because when I retire, I'm going to be an author.' And the author says, 'Well, that's fascinating, because when I retire, I'm going to be an eye surgeon,' as if all you need is time. And I think that's what happens. I think that there are lots of people that have always. I have a terrible singing voice. Okay, I would love to be a singer. I loved Nat King Cole, one of my favorites, Great American Songbook. Nat King Cole, one of the most beautiful voices ever. And I love the work, another Cole Porter. I'd have been the world's best lounge singer. I would have been. I have a terrible voice. I could take 1,000,000 singing lessons, and it's not going to help. My voice is not going to get any better. So I think that there's a lot of people that want to write and either don't have, it's a lot of organization. You have to keep the story straight. You can't let it run away from you. And you also have to put your mind, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the reader. I was a reader long before I was ever an author. In fact, Stephen King often talks about the fact that you can't be even a halfway decent writer unless you read a ton. And you're going to find out what works, what doesn't. You can actually learn a lot by reading bad books. You'll know what makes a bad book. But I think there's a lot of people out there, I think they glamorize what it's like to be an author. And in fact, it's a lot of hard work. It's seat of pants to seat of chair. And you may read bad books by that author, but I don't know that you'll read a second or a third book that's by that author. Because if you clunk and you don't redeem yourself, it's kind of hard to keep that going.
So when you are done with a book, how do you know it's done?
How do I know it's done? I'm not a big, so Dan Brown, who wrote Da Vinci Code, is a friend of mine, and Dan and I have the same agent, and my agent had mentioned something about how Dan had outlined Da Vinci Code. She's like, I know you don't like to outline a lot, but I'm always trying to encourage you to try different things and grow as an author. So I went to Dan's house. There's a room. It's got books, and it's like Batman, flips up the head on the statue, presses the button, the books go, and it's a stone staircase with Thor. I'm kidding, but I joke that you go down this stone staircase, and Dan's got this key. It's almost like a Ark of the Covenant, Indiana Jones thing that goes to the wall.
Literally had me. I was like, oh.
And the wall opens, and then there's the outline for Da Vinci Code with the shaft of light, and it's sitting on this stone pillar in the middle of the room. So Dan let me read the outline for Da Vinci Code, and I got to see all the stuff that didn't make it into Da Vinci Code, and it was intense. I mean, Dan is probably one of the smartest authors I know, and he's so talented, and he detailed everything. Well, Robert Frost once said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. So I figured I got a great agent, she's trying to make me better. I tried to outline a book, outlined it, sat down to write it, and I was bored because I knew what was going to happen. And so there was no excitement, no surprise for me. And the neat thing about doing it the way I do it, I know that I've got a guy that's got a briefcase. He's been shot 3 times. He's in Zurich, and he needs to get to the train station on the other side of town in 5 minutes, and there's people chasing him. I don't know how he's going to get there. So I'm having the experience of writing it that I hope you're having reading it, where my heart's pounding, and I don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of times I'll come home at night, and my wife can tell by the expression on my face if it's a red wine night or a bourbon night, and how bad of a corner I've painted myself into. But she says, don't worry, you'll figure it out tomorrow. And I think not knowing how it's going to happen next is part of what adds to the tension and the excitement.
And speaking of red, I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you about your work with the red cell unit, because people, this is like, so interesting.
In the aftermath of 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security was created, and in a tiny corner of DHS, they put into place something that I think is probably one of the most fascinating, one of the most forward-thinking and aggressive government programs. It was called the Analytic Red Cell Program. And what happened is our government realized that 9/11 had happened because they weren't thinking creatively. It was a failure of imagination. So President Bush and all the people in Washington said, we can't let that ever happen again. So they created this program, and they invited creative thinkers in from outside D.C. to help them kind of anticipate what the terrorist attack, the next one, might look like. The government wanted to stay 4 to 5 steps ahead. So I got invited. Michael Bay, who did the Transformers movies, the director, got invited. And so that's the kind of people they brought in, and we helped game out scenarios. But people, I like to tell people, because they say, oh, were you able to use any of that for your books? I thought you might ask, and I tell people it's the Las Vegas of government programs. What happens in the red cell stays in the red cell. So I can't use it for my books, but it is the same creative process that I use for my books that I then was able to do for the government.
And why do you sign your book, Stay in the Fight?
This is my thing. If you bring me a book, I don't just sign my name, I sign Stay in the Fight. I was actually signing books for a retired Delta Force operative, and I said, how do you want me to sign it? And he said, sign it, Stay in the Fight, Brad Thor. And he said, you know what? That phrase, and he explained to me the nature of it. For those, I asked you before about Marcus Luttrell and Lone Survivor. And for those of you that did see it, there's a point where one of his teammates is injured, and he's trying to get his attention. He's like, I get it, you're injured, but can you still fight, bro? Can you fight, okay? You're still in the fight, stay in the fight. So that resonated with me on so many levels, because it was basically the ethos of these incredible warriors, that as long as I can draw a breath, as long as I can grab a knife, a rock, pull a trigger, I'm not out of the fight. I'm still in the fight. So that became a very powerful thing for me, and that's now how I sign the books, is Stay in the Fight.
I love it. And last question before we turn it to the audience. Which book do you wish you'd written?
Which book do I wish I'd written?
Because you're a really, 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 really big reader. What was the last book that you read that you were like, damn, I wish that was something that I'd,
Well, I'll tell you the biggest inspiration for me was, it's an old book called The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. And I like that because it was the first real cliffhanger, because he was writing it chapter by chapter, turning it over to a French newspaper to get people to buy the next edition of the newspaper. So I think that really fits. But my favorite book of all times is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which is probably it is easily the greatest book I've ever read. I love that book.
And that was the one where you were like,
Yeah, I would have. There's no gunfights and things like that because it's a medieval cathedral being built. But yeah, I would have liked to have written that book. It's one of the best books ever written.
And I'm sure you guys have questions for Brad, because I sure do. I could literally talk to him for another 20 hours. He is so fascinating. So let's hear it.
How's it going, Brad?
Hey, thank you for coming.
Thank you. My name is Zebi. I'm curious, since you've been overseas and since, you've witnessed everything, and you write about your books have violence in them, has it become easier for you to incorporate violence in your book, or I guess in other words, have you become desensitized to violence in general?
That's a good question about has it become easier to write violence in my books, or have I become desensitized to it? Probably no. I think it's reprehensible. I hate to see it. I do not. It's not something I enjoy writing. But probably what surprises me is that when I write things and they come true, where I'm trying to think of a worst case scenario, and I hope, okay, that doesn't happen, and then it does. In fact, we had talked about it, Don and I together in the green room. I get asked, "Are you afraid you're giving the bad guys ideas?" And that. Absolutely not. In fact, I have a group of people who are involved in the War on Terror, and I share my manuscripts with them. And I've had them say, you know what? When you were doing research with us, we told you A, and we told you C, and you somehow figured out B. B's got to come out of the book. You cannot put that in the book. You can't have the bad guys see that. And I do, and I pull it out. But it really is a great question, because that is part of what happens in my books. Is there is that violence, but I don't think I get desensitized to it. But I do try to. It's not huge for hugeness' sake. I'm trying to be as real as possible with it.
And I also don't think you have A, gratuitous violence, and
no.
B, we also talked about this in the green room, that you can never blame an artist for what someone does with his work.
That's true. And I would say there is the opening scene with my main character in this. So you've got the special operations team that gets ambushed right in the beginning of the book, and then you fast forward to the next chapter, and it's my main character, and that is probably one of the most violent scenes I've ever written. And it is one gunshot, one place in the world, and it is literally. Because of the way it was carried out and because of the reason the character was charged with doing that, that's probably, so I hadn't thought about that, but that's probably the most violent piece, not gratuitous, but probably the most violent scene I've ever written is in this book.
Next question, please.
Hi, Brad.
Hi.
Would you consider writing in another genre?
Absolutely. I think I never appreciated, I'm going to say a great artist's name, not to draw any parallels, okay? I was never a big fan of Picasso. I was never impressed by Picasso, let's put it that way. And then I went to, because I thought, oh, it's Cubism. My kids can paint like Picasso. I didn't see the brilliance in Picasso. But then I went to Spain, and I saw the paintings Picasso did before he became the Picasso we think of now. I mean, amazingly detailed paintings where it looks like a Rembrandt. And I realized, my God, this man is an incredibly he captured the human form perfectly. So I think every artist who works in a specific area would like to branch out and try different things. So I think so. I'd probably have to do it under a different name, because I wouldn't want Donna showing up expecting a great kind of spy counterterrorism thriller, and then it's Bridges of Madison County, and none of the bridges get blown up. Nobody gets shot in Madison County. I wouldn't want to disappoint her.
I'm like, where's the counterterrorism What's going on here? What's happening?
Wait, they're hugging now? Does she have a knife? Is she going to shiv him and break off the handle?
Is she working for the bad guys?
Exactly.
Last question, please.
Hey, Brad.
Hey.
What's your daily schedule like? Do you know how many hours or pages you'll be writing a day? Have you, while you're writing, do you ever think like, oh, maybe this might turn into a movie, or want that?
That's an awesome question. Thank you.
And I think that's so interesting, too. I was going to ask you that also.
So when I write, it is all cinematic. As I'm writing and coming up with the ideas, it's playing out against the movie screen of my mind. And we have one book in development with Warner Brothers right now, my Athena project, which is about an all-female Delta Force unit, and that's for Ronda Rousey, the mixed martial arts champion. Ronda's going to star in that. And then
That is amazing.
yeah,
Amazing.
Ronda's an amazing woman. Very, very cool. I like Ronda Rousey a lot. She's awesome. And then my very first book, The Lions of Lucerne, is also in development now. So that's on the movie front. So I'm always thinking very cinematically, but that's just how I work as a writer. And as far as how my day goes, everybody thinks it's like Hemingway, you know, that you're done by noon, you're drunk, you're fishing, all that kind of stuff. It's hard. I set a goal for myself of 2,500 words a day, and that's 5 single-space pages. I'll go to the gym, work out in the morning, be at my desk by like 8:30, and then I'm normally there. I'm a dad too, so I want to be home for dinner. So I'm normally at my desk till about 5 or 6, and then I want to be home and help with homework and enjoy my family. But so that's what the process is like. I'm there. I got my laptop. I'm either at the desk or sitting on the couch in my office. Sometimes when I change characters, I will move position in the office because it's just there's something physical, this kind of connection with the mind of moving to a different place helps me, I don't know, maybe stretched out like this, I think better like a bad guy, I don't know, but that's how it works.
I feel like you have the same philosophy as Stephen King. On Writing is one of my favorite
Great book.
go-to books, and he said the same thing. You just have to sit down and do it.
It's seat
Don't
of
talk about
pants
doing
to
it,
seat of
just
chair.
do it.
Yeah, well, and that's what, when Maria Shriver was working on her children's book, she kept telling Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, and he got sick of listening to her. He said, Maria, don't talk about it, do it. And that's what my wife did with me, don't talk about it,
that
do
same
it.
voice.
Yeah, and she's like that big. It's a picture Meg Ryan with the Arnold Schwarzenegger, do it.
Do it.
Do it.
Foreign Agent is out today, so get it, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna.